Yes.
Okay.
Gdzie być? YouTube?
Teraz wiesz, że jest odwrotnie. Jest odwrotnie. Jak jest wyłączony, to jest on.
Ale nie świeci się.
O Jezus, Kasper, błagam. Tłumaczycie, jest odwrotnie, no dlatego nie...
Ale światło też jest odwrotnie?
Światło się włącza po 5 sekundach. To jest, wiesz, cudowny patent Maki w tych głośnikach. W całej serii HR. I nikt tego nie wie i ludzie się męczą, bo jak nie mają dźwięku wychodzącego, to myślą, że to jest głośnik wyłączony, rozumiesz?
No ale to żeby energię zaoszczędzić, tak?
Tak. Tylko, że powinno być odwrotnie. Przycisk powinien być odwrotnie. Już. Nie ma o czym mówić. Ciśnięty jest włączony.
Mike, where's the main volume here? Where's the main volume?
Well, in this case there is no volume, then it's only here.
It's directly.
Because we got to get out from the box for the big knob. I got you because there's no other choice in fact. Well, it would be if I would. Okay, I can do it. I can do it.
Hold on a sec. Hold on a sec. It doesn't go through here. I'm very sorry, but it doesn't go through here. Or can we lower those simply?
Okay, you can do it like this. On the okay. The leftmost. There's a small trimmer on the left. You see? It's input sensitivity. It's written.
Rozklejenie.
Yes.
In fact, we'll be in trouble because it was calibrated quite precisely. But that's what it goes.
I put it for the...
Okay, just play and I will adjust. To jest ten przypadek, gdzie akurat typowy.
Coś tam. A myślisz, że tak można? Jeszcze głośniej. The other way maybe.
I think we have soundmans here. I can ask soundmans like Kacper.
Well, the best would be if we could go from the audio in here.
Yeah, we do this. Okay. Czekaj, dos. Możesz wcisnąć z przodu? Okay. No.
It was a... Shall I put it back?
Yeah.
Can you play something? Poszukać po... And then we can up here. Again, okay?
Now we're all set, almost. Now we just have to check the slides.
The video.
Okay.
W sensie prototyp.
At the moment we can even switch off the light.
Pokazane jak
It will
zmieniać.
be bright enough.
Let's see.
Profesor pokazał.
To nie sprawdziłeś tego. Ja szybciej szedłem.
To znaczy, no pytałem się, gdzie wejść na stronę, ale...
Ta sama strona, studio. Marteczką. Studio SME, a muzyka.
To zobaczyć to ty masz.
Tak, że już wchodzę. Już nie musisz.
Jest okej.
Kąt jest. Okej.
Nie.
Nie, wszystkie są czarne?
Gdzie?
For these we might have to switch it off.
Będzie płyt?
Yeah, we will then
I think it's bright enough. Because then,
Tak?
no jak wyłączymy zupełnie, to wtedy z kolei nie widać webcastu. Więc zróbmy kompromis, dobrze?
the thing is I need to read.
Okay, so that's what we need. That's the best. Or half of this.
Let's see. Maybe we can
So, ja byłem tutaj o 12 godzinie, to nie było nikogo. Ja w środku sobie tłumaczyłem, jak mu to wytłumaczyć. I mu powiedziałem, wiesz, że czwartek to właściwie nie ma u nas zajęć, więc może przyjść niewiele osób. Nagle mamy komplet. To jest pełne zaskoczenie. To miał być wykład w piątek, ale w związku z tym, że to ma koncert, no to się umówiliśmy, że jednak już ktoś inny ma wykład.
Ale wtedy nie widać się tam na tym, w internecie nigdzie nie widać.
Webcast.
No ale jak
You need
jesteśmy
some
zupełnie,
more
a że on ma lampkę. If we can keep it like this.
Okay.
And when we put the video, then I will ask you to
Yeah, then
to
I
switch
give
it
you a
off.
sign for the video and you turn
No
it
to
off.
wtedy będzie widać.
Po prostu sami.
You want to say something?
Full service. Yes. Proszę Państwa, bardzo się cieszę, że jesteście Państwo tak licznie zgromadzeni. Znaczy, czy są jacyś obcokrajowcy, czyli w języku polskim. Nie trzeba tłumaczyć na język angielski.
Co kojarzy rękę do góry.
So that's a great opportunity to have you here. In fact, Alex is familiar with the festival, and you are also again part of the intensive program of the Audio Art Festival in Krakow. But we have a great opportunity to have you talking here a little bit about your workshop, about the techniques you are using, and I don't know how many singers are here, but there are few. We also do different vocal practice, so that's really great to be in between professional and alternative vocal techniques. So Alex Nowitz is from Potsdam, but present all the time in other cities. So I have I put usually cities near the name of artist, not no countries.
Berlin, Potsdam.
Yeah, but mainly the main reference with the space, with the institute, with the academic, if there is some connection. So that's the point.
Yeah.
Great to have you here.
Thank you.
I hope you have a nice traveling night. No bo to nie wszyscy wiedzą, że jest nocny pociąg z Berlina do Krakowa. Jedyny kłopot, że przyjeżdża o 5:29. I zawsze przyjeżdża nie na ten peron, który jest w systemie. To jest jakby następna przyjemność, wyzwanie dla wolontariuszy, ale ja dzisiaj raz mam wolontariuszy i też się pogubiłem, także spoko.
Well, thank you very much for inviting Marek and to make this happening. I think this is very important that we can continue working and that we use the night trains these days. Also, thank you for making that possible because you just need a little bit more time if you take night trains or trains instead of planes. But I try to actually do it and to take the opportunity, even it might not be so pleasant, in fact. So the lecture, what I'm talking about is multi-vocal arts strategies towards radical vocality. And basically it's about a term that I coined to indicate that we are able to embrace all kinds of different performance voices in one person. And that's why I called it multi-vocality or the multi-vocal voice. And that embraces four main categories. That is the singing voice, all sorts of singing practices, the speaking voice, all sorts of speaking voices, the actor's voice, the whispered voice, and there is the extended voice, the voice that goes beyond all kinds of traditional or conventional use of the voice, applying either extended vocal techniques on the one hand, or applying technologies to extend the voice. And the fourth category is the disembodied voice. Is the voice that is no longer connected to a body any longer. So it comes out of the loudspeaker. It might be played back by an audio device or something like that, any sort of machine. And if we then combine the disembodied voice with the live voice, you enter a very interesting or a very unfamiliar, even uncanny place. Because on the one hand, you're working with a dead voice in a sense. On the other hand, you're working with the live voice. And once you merge the two, you enter a very unfamiliar place. So that's just a short introduction to the term of multivocality. And so to make it a little bit, to give you an idea about how I structured this lecture is, I would like to go through an artistic research project that I was busy with the last 5 years at the Stockholm University of the Arts, which happened to be my PhD in performative and mediated practices with specialization in opera, called Monsters I Love on multivocal arts. And it's an online dissertation, so you can always go there on the research catalog and look at all the writings and all the video and audio examples I've gathered there. And the second part, or third part, because after these two, I will go into a brief historical overview, or basically the history of vocal performance art. So what I would like to also touch upon is the manifesto for the multivocal voice. This is the part I will close up the lecture. It's rather a performative lecture than a lecture, if you know what I mean. So, short introduction into history of vocal performance art. It was the seminal singer Kathy Barbarian who in the 60s brought up the term of new vocality. And what I, in particular, it's a short essay. If you Google it and if you find it online, it's a short essay, but it really brings it all to the point. What is at stake when it comes down to new vocality? What is the new vocality that appears so threatening to the old guard? Now you might say, well, it's not a problem anymore. If I look at Audio Arts Festival, if I look at other venues and programs, all there, new vocality can be experienced. The reason why I bring it up, though, is when we look towards music education, universities, there is still the old guard. So if you wanna, for instance, study vocal performance art to a contemporary extent, you cannot. You have to actually go, and that's what I did. I studied the tenor voice, then I worked in the spoken theater field, then I got acquainted with STIME, the Studio for Electro-Instrumental Music in Amsterdam. They helped me building an instrument. So in fact, vocal performance art, if you incorporate all these four categories I told you before, then you're entering a highly interdisciplinary field of music creation and music making. So that's why I think the question of Kathy Barbarian is still relevant these days, even 50 years later. But But it starts even earlier. It starts with around the beginning of the 20th century with pieces of Arnold Schoenberg, for instance. He introduced the Sprechgesang in Pierrot Lunaire, but also the Dada movement all over the world, not only in Zurich. These are the protagonists in Zurich. We all know that there is a Dada movement in Russia, in France. And another protagonist of that kind is Kurt Schwitters. You may have encountered that, and his Ursonata, which is a seminal work. Then in the 60s, and with the emergence of rock music, also Kathy Berberian came up. She was a partner from Luciano Berio, new music composer from Italy. And what Kathy Berberian did was to introduce the actor's voice into singing performances. Another protagonist in the 60s, 70s was Demetrius Stratos. He always was interested in some sort of a multi-vocal voice, but he was developing lots of multiphonics on the voice. So meaning that more than just one tone, 3 tones at the same time appear. He also interpreted pieces by John Cage, by the way. Now, if we come closer to the present time, we should acknowledge their work too. Not only too, we should mainly acknowledge their work. And there is Trevor Wishart. If you have a chance, look into his book on sonic arts, because he's one of those rare examples for being a vocalist, an experimental vocalist on the one hand. So he is experimenting and improvising with the voice a lot, but he's also exploring the sound possibilities of the voice in a studio environment. So in that respect, he's sort of a father figure for what I'm doing, basically. Even I didn't know by the time when I started my work, I didn't know about his work, but now I know, and I highly recommend to look into this book. And because these books are fairly expensive, so you might not want to buy them on your own, but your duty is to go to the librarian and tell them, look, we need to have this book. They, of course, since this is such a niche kind of performance art form, they don't come up with that idea themselves. So you have to give this idea to them. Joan LaBarbera was also since the 60s very active from the United States. She has made this record, Voices the Original Instrument, and with the same title she also did an essay which was published 2002, which gives a great summary of her biography, but at the same time how she developed vocal performance art together with composers such as John Cage, Morton Subotnick is actually her husband, and people like that. Michael Edward Edgerton, he's now professor in Malmö in Sweden. He has written a fantastic book, The 21st Century Voice, which aims to bring together all kinds of extra normal voices that you can think of and that are recorded one way or the other. And in that respect, this book is very important too. Another very important book is The Techniques of Singing by Nicolas Isherwood, who is part of this festival. And he's a fantastic interpreter of new music. He has done lots of premieres of Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, and he has written this book which was published on Bärenreiter, Schott Bärenreiter. It's bilingual in German and English, The Techniques of Singing. So that gives a great variety of the approach towards contemporary vocal performance art from a composer's perspective. Yes, present time needs something which still needs to be confirmed, right? But Pamela Sett is obviously one of the most important at the moment from San Francisco. Franziska Baumann. I know Franziska. I know not only of her, or I don't only know her in person, but I know also that she was part of the Audio Arts Festival some years ago, you might remember. And Tomomi Adachi, with whom I had 2 performances so far together, and myself. Now, when it comes down to the title of this lecture about strategies to radical vocality, I highly recommend to read essays by Peter Verstraete. He has brought up this term of radical vocality, and what he means by that is, well, radical could mean extreme, but in an etymological way, radical, the term derives from the Latin expression radix, and that means nothing else than root. So what radical means is the aim to go down to the root of the voice. And what is the root if it's covered up with bel canto concepts in terms of pop music as we have nowadays? There is always a filter on the voice. There is always some sort of a strange machine-like effect on the voice. So there are different concepts there, but what is the root of the voice really? And especially, what is the root of the voice when it's beyond, when we are operating with the sound only, or predominantly, as opposed to set words into music, you know? So what is the root of the voice? And Peter Verstraete, he's now based at the University in Groningen. He's their assistant professor for culture and arts. He tries to nail down new vocality at the present time. So, let's have a look at the work that I presented. Oh, of course I need internet
help
connection.
you.
Yes, I need internet connection.
So select AM,
Is it AM? Okay.
then you will have to log in. Just maybe open a new tab. Oh,
Yeah.
It is SME. And then 2000. Yeah. So now you should.
Can I close this window?
Yes, yeah, I think so.
Here we go. Fantastic. So this is the research catalog established by the Society for Artistic Research, which is a loose association of worldwide universities. It started off in Switzerland, I guess, or in the Benelux countries. I'm not sure. Anyways, they're based nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Society for Artistic Research, SAR. They have a journal online, which is called JAR, Journal for Artistic Research, and they have this fantastic platform called the Research Catalog that they host, which gives the artist researcher the opportunity to share knowledge, but also examples, video, pictures, text, all together at one spot. And okay, so this is what we have here. Let's put it in full screen. Yes. So this is the site. I find this quite interesting because it's a canvas that you can almost unlimited extend to the right. Kind of funny, no? And then down. But and give you a little idea. Oh. And here you have the whole thing at your display. I find this kind of interesting because instead of having a table of content, you have this visual approach to a work. And it's two-parted. So in the first row, you find all the writings, introduction to the exposition, introduction to the field. If you're interested in history of vocal performance art, you might want to read this essay. You click on it, and it opens it. Here we go. Isn't that great? Doing things with the mouse is the second chapter. There's a chapter called Designing and Playing the Strophonion, Extending the Vocal Art Performance Using a Custom Digital Musical Instrument. If you click on that link, it opens another article that I published, I think it was 2016, on another great platform, especially great for electroacoustic music. It's an archive for that. It's the journal is called E-Contact. It's based in Montreal, Canada. And so this article gives you an idea about the instrument that I built and that I designed and developed at STIM, the Studio for Electro-Instrumental Music in Amsterdam. Please have a seat.
Ja, dankjewel.
There's another chair. Yes. So, for all of you who think or who expected this presentation to be a tech talk, I have to disappoint you. I'm more interested about what we can do in general with the voice, as opposed to expose the possibilities in designing an instrument. But you have this article, and you can go through it, and there are pictures, and it tells a little bit about the legacy of the instruments. Die Hands by Michel Weiswitz, you might know Die Hands by Michel, who was the former director of STIM in Amsterdam. Thank you so much. And there are also videos. It goes into the question about wired or wireless instrument, pitfalls of wireless connections, etc., etc. Here is a video, so you can check it. There's also explanation about the controllers. I can also show them here for you, but I will go on very quickly and skip that. So this is the left-hand controller, and this is the right-hand controller. If you're very soft and you just touch it by the housing, not the microphone. Here's the microphone. That's the ultrasound, and then you can actually hold it yourself. Experience how it feels to hold them. Oh, let me. Yeah. You're right. And if you're
This looks like a very sci-fi. Sci-fi kind of feeling.
Transformer.
No, like kind of.
Avatar.
No, like a robot. Like being inside of or being
A robot.
Kind of extended. Extended. To be. It feels like it's not
Extension of
also
the
kind of hands-on movement.
Yes. And what is interesting about the controllers is that there are built-in 3D sensors. They measure the sensors on that axis and on that axis, and some sort of in between the Z axis. I don't use it very much because it's not as controllable as the X and the Y axis. And all these data, this continuous data, gets transformed in the computer into musical and sonic parameters. So I can use it then to control pitch or frequency.
And
This is only a holding device, so we can put it on a stand. Anyways, I'm getting off track here. I was there with the monsters I love, the work. So you have this article there. You have actually the manifesto for the multivocal voice that I am gonna present in a few moments.
But
It
may I
is-
ask a quick question?
It is there too.
The ultrasonic microphone.
Yeah, there's an ultrasonic device. Yeah.
How you use it?
It's the only distance measuring sensor.
Ah, okay, I see.
So ultrasound is something we cannot hear
Yeah.
with our human hearing. The bats, the animals, the bats, they hear those sounds. But we can use this technology. So there's a receiver, as I told you, on the left-hand controller, and there is a sending device on the hip.
Uh-huh.
So I'm wearing a belt in the performance. So with this gesture, I'm measuring the distance
I see.
between the two.
Thank you.
And I use that mainly for volume control and frequency control. But if you come to the performance tomorrow, vocal space lines, you will experience all that. So,
Tu jest takie short information. All my students are on the guest list. To be clear, because
Olga.
pardon?
Olga jeszcze. Olga przyszła.
Olga is in charge of this, or
Aha, w sensie, no, tak wszyscy jest.
I sent it to Kacper and to Konrad yesterday.
No, this is separate.
So
This is for the
you
conference.
should get it, but no, it's there. So both from Intermedia and from the Academy of Music, you are on the list. So you need only to spell your name, and that's it. You have a print and transfer already. That's much more better than to giving you the carnet, because then it's like I feel that I lose them in a way, because people then don't come. So that's much more better to have this way. Just to let you know.
shall I?
Yes.
Okay. So you find another essays, and what you might be particularly interested is the glossary. And why is that? Because it tries to sum up all the terms which you might not be familiar with, simply because some of those terms I use are invented by myself. So this is a great way to actually enter the whole thinking that is behind that performance practice. Some of these words are, of course, used by others as well. I haven't invented all of them, but multivocal is one of those. It goes back to Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who has used the term the first time to address something like many voices within one person. But it hasn't been really entered the English language yet. Most of the people just still use it as multi-vocal, which indicates it's a kind of a new word, but not really. And if you look up the dictionaries, it's still, it's not yet clear whether it's a new word or whether it has entered it. I think by now we can use it without the hyphen. What else might be interesting? Strophonion. This gives you a quick introduction to the instrument of the strophonion. The controllers you hold in your hands at the moment, that is the instrument of the strophonion, derived or built upon 3 Greek syllables. Strophe means rotating, turning. Phone means the voice, sound. And ion is an allusion to the accordion. It has the same ending. And why is that? Because this is referring to the left hand control, or the left hand gestures that I'm applying to use this instrument. Okay, vocalogy. Well, vocalogy is a term that I have come up with to give, again, to give the thinking behind a practice a name. So it has two parts. Logic is one part. The logic about vocal art performances. That's what it actually basically means. And yeah, well, this is something I will explain later on. So if we scroll down this work, the so-called appendix, this is where you can find all the works that I've done the last 5 years in terms of audio examples, video examples. We just here in this column there are works just for the solo voice without electronics. And then once you click on the project, you have again to the right and you can scroll down. You have different objects. Aha, this is a program note, very uninteresting because it's in German. But here you have the video on Vimeo. Can yeah, thanks. I scroll a bit. Do, do. Da, 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 da. Okay, thank you. So this piece is called Mundfundstücke, das Konsonantenvokabular. Mouth found object, the consonant vocabulary in English. Since I'm dealing with the voice for the last 25, 30 years, trying to find new sonorities, finding new places to discover that I'm not familiar myself with. And with this piece I tried to work only with the consonants that I have at my disposal from the German-English alphabet. And why is that, you might think? Oh, well, in our culture, in Western culture, the concept about vocal performance art is mainly extending vowels. That is the main concept in the West when it comes down to vocal performance art. I mean, in general and the majority. But there's very little focus on actually the percussive sounds of the voice and the consonantic vocabulary that is there as well. Of course, we need other forms to prolong consonants. Because if you have a percussive consonant like the derived from a D consonant, you have to invent other ways of extending it. Because once you produce the sound, it's gone. It's another way to deal with vowels. You can extend as long as your breath holds the vowel. So this piece is sort of an approach to focus or highlight the potential of the consonants. So let's go back here. This is just to give you an example of those pieces. Then the second column here, you have works for voice and strophonium. You will see some of those later on. Here are works when I'm collaborating with dancers. Here are works that I basically wrote the pieces, but I didn't perform it myself, others performed it. I highly recommend this piece, Kaspar, which is about the question of Kaspar Hauser. Are you familiar with this myth, Kaspar Hauser? Is this
Maybe not all.
not? This goes back to some part of Bavaria in I think it was the 18th, 19th century. There was a child who was locked away from society and was raised in complete darkness and the kid. Sorry? Isolation, was completely by his own, and at the age of 14, 15, he was released to society. And of course you can imagine what that means to a person who has never experienced other people and all the media he was confronted with. And the question about this piece is, what does a Kaspar Hauser react like if he would be released in nowadays context? And so the three musicians, can you put down the light? Thanks. They all are somehow handicapped. So the cello player, he can't see. The English horn player, he cannot hear the others. Actually, he's really wearing earmuffs, and the pianist, he wears baklava. Baklava, yes. So the senses are somewhat restricted. Let's have a quick look. So he's under the piano, playing with the fingers, like hand percussion. player as well. Okay, so far you can actually read the program note, and you can read about the quotes that I'm using in this piece. Actually, one is by the Nobel Prize winner this year, which is very controversial about Peter Handke. But the quote I'm using there is about Peter Handke in the late 60s, not about Peter Handke in the Serbian in the Serbian War. So you can read those and get familiar with the background of the piece, or you can study the score of the piece. So.
I have a question.
And there are also, and that's why.
There's a
Sorry. Yeah. I won't forget it. But let me finish this. So, why is this piece in the whole topic of multi-vocal voice? It's because I'm using those quotes for the musicians to interpret those in various different ways. So, also the voice of the musician is, for me, of importance.
I have a question about Kaspar. Is it clear that this person really existed, or is it more like a myth?
Oh well, I guess I think it is based on real facts, but what it has become until today is that it has become a myth, sort of, because the sources or the resources to draw on this story are very rare, and very different people were reporting about this kid, basically.
Because there are some conditions that a human being needs to stay alive, yeah, and that's what he experienced. It sounds like it is not really possible to even stay alive. So there are also experiments with babies who didn't get, just touch, just love, and they just died. So there are like different conditions that a human being really needs to stay alive. So I'm just questioning if it is possible that this person lived or not.
These details, of course,
Yeah.
are not reported in this specific historical character. But it is an interesting experiment in terms of thinking. And it's basically a question about our life at the present time. And
we have several cases from our times, similar, not so long, but like many years. The women which are kept in a basement, yes, well, with some basic things. So I think with the Kaspar, I was part of the spectacle based on Kaspar Hauser, also with the big documentary about. So there was food, there was most of the things, there was servants, there were many people involved in this to keep him alive. Understand? But there was a crazy idea to keep him isolated.
yeah, of course,
We didn't know anything.
there is no question about
the
that.
word. And also mainly when he started to learn speak. I was 18.
Mhm. So, and I'm basically done with this presentation of the work online because it's online, so it's for you to provide you with all this material. You can experience it and explore it yourself. The last column, though, is a collaboration with musicians, and these are basically improvisations that I. Oops, what happened now?
You have to move it sometimes. It's
Move what?
the cable. It's not stable.
It will, perhaps it will show up in a moment. If not, then we have. Do we have the remote near you?
Should be.
Sorry. Okay.
Silent?
Maybe is it possible to turn it off and on?
I will take the cable to my computer and then fix in a short moment.
Okay. You can go on without.
Can go on with that.
Oh, let's make a break.
What time is it? Do we have to stop
We have
straight?
30. No, you can leave it later.
Yeah, so it's not that much time anymore. Well, we can have a 5 minutes break to sort this out, and then go through.
We can wait without a break. No
What
problem.
about you guys? No break needed? No break needed. Fantastic. My God. Cool.
We'll do it.
Then we don't make a break. Anyway,
2 minutes. Now we have to cool down, wait a little bit, and then restart.
this is the modern times.
Yeah.
Humans don't need breaks, but the machines need breaks. Isn't that funny?
No, the human made the wrong connection. Humans are guilty.
They're always good.
Of course.
Where are my controllers, by the way?
Not yet.
What control?
No, to, w tej chwili jest najgorsza opcja. On w tej chwili przechodzi przez podwójne chłodzenie. To czasami się tak zdarza. Chcesz uruchomić na
O, jest.
No już, tak, ale wiesz, zgasł i się włączył teraz dopiero.
Może do
Okej.
wodu.
Because for the last part, I
Suchy lód.
actually need the videos. This is
I know.
part of the presentation.
No.
Here we go. Hope it does the same thing over here.
No, it shouldn't.
It should not do the same thing. Let's go on.
You know, the best is to be practical. Not to,
No?
not yet.
Do I have to do
HDMI HDMI 2, HDMI 2, so either it will find themselves and that's the best, or I will force it. Okay, you get it.
All right, let's continue, right? So here comes the last part of this presentation, which is the manifesto for the multivocal voice. Gives you an idea about what I consider the multivocal voice. Yes. So this text would rather be performed than read. The term multivocal voice, in German vielstimmige Stimme, outlines a concept that has been ripped from my vocal performance practice, yet remains at its core. During the performance, the multivocal voice refers incessantly to the origin, posing the question, where do I come from? At the same time, it constantly raises the flag of destiny, asking, where do I go to? The concept of the multivocal voice represents a range of expressions within contemporary vocal arts, a multitude of voices, all of which can be produced either by or with one singular voice. By indicates a voice as the sole source of sound. With, on the other hand, points to the aspect that the voice is used as sound material, but is transformed and multiplied through the application of technological means. In order to define the notion of the extended voice, and that's what the multivocal voice is, in fact, it's another word for extended voice, we ought to differentiate two ways of how it can show itself. Firstly, it's the application of those techniques that expand the field of vocal artistry by going beyond the Western cultural norm of the operatic voice. These practices have come to be called extended vocal techniques. Secondly, the voice might as well be extended by the application of technological means, such as live electronics, allowing the manipulation and transformation of vocal material. Certainly all kinds of mixed forms between the two categories of an extended voice are conceivable as well. The Strophonion is a wireless gesture-controlled digital musical instrument that over the period of 2 years, from 2010 through to 2011, has been developed and built at Stein in Amsterdam. And it has been redeveloped in terms of its software environment by Berlin-based designer of musical instruments and guitarist Sukanda Katadinata. And the new software environment is based now on Max 7. No, it's okay.
Sorry.
Well, it doesn't matter really. It's okay. Thank you. Building an intricate configuration for sound and music making from scratch based on the idea of using a variety of sampling procedures to record the voice in the number of different sensors to play back and control the parameters such as volume, pitch, frequency, etc., is a tedious process of discussing, devising, implementing, playtesting, and debugging. Discussing, devising, implementing, playtesting, debugging. Debugging, playtesting, implementing, devising, discussing, and so on and so forth. The multivocal voice shows responsibility not for one, but for many voices. It creates many orbits and therefore is multi-atmospheric. The voice contains a certain momentum that sets another person into motion. The motion triggered by the voice can take place purely on the inside, for instance, in the form of an emotional activation leading to a specific mood and atmosphere. Or, on the contrary, the condition of being moved comes to the fore, on the outside, through the play of diverse facial and gestural expressions. Even the whole body can be affected through the expression of bodily movements or even dance. The voice touches the other by producing and sending out sound waves that set into vibration not only the eardrum but the whole auditory apparatus of the other person. The voice in general, and particularly the multivocal voice, sends and receives uninterruptedly. What adheres to the voice is the instant, the blink of the eye, der Augenblick, die Jetztzeit, and the certainty of the oncoming, das Entgegenkommende. It emerges in the moment and exists through what comes. A multivocal voice performance is an audibly and visibly becoming, setting itself to work of truth. To use an expression by German philosopher Martin Heidegger. Die Kunst ist das sich ins Werk setzen der Wahrheit. And in concrete terms, it is a vocal truth that sets itself into the work. In concrete terms, it is a vocal truth that sets itself into the work. During the performance, the multivocal voice artist immediately puts the voice into the work. That is to say, within the performance, the multivocal voice directly produces a work and exhibits it at the same time. In a best case scenario, it isn't the carrier of the multivocal voice who does something, but the voice itself alone. Because when the voice becomes an it, by saying it sings in us and outward from us, it performs without our input, just as by itself. That's when we have reached that level on which the voice is threefold. Material, production tool, and as a result, or in other words, as work. This it status is, for the multivocal voice performer, highly desirable. The immediate primary creation in and out of the instant, as opposed to its subsequent interpretation, a secondary creation. So the immediate primary creation skips the compositional process in the traditional understanding of involving an additional artist. The multivocal voice artist can be both composer and performer in union, a composer-performer. The performance act is then also an instant composing procedure, as long as the performer decides not to produce a score in advance in order to enact it during the performance situation. The performance, in this case, therefore, is a composition in real time, and the composition consists of a performance with compositional layers, in case of a solo presentation, comprising voice and body. If the performer adds novel technology-driven devices such as the custom-built gesture-controlled live electronics, as you just heard the Strophonion, he/she gains three compositional layers to deal with: the voice, the body, and the instrument. In this way, the notion of the multi-vocal voice can also be understood as a polyphonic performance voice that, with regard to the application of electronics on the one hand and of artifices concerning advanced vocal techniques, such as multiphonics, on the other. This allows the splitting up into further voices in diverse voice proportions. As an example for the three-layered performance practice involving voice, body, and technology that I propose to call vocal or voice-induced sound dance, I suggest to watch and listen to the composition called Untitled, featuring voice, Strophonion, and a chair to be ignored. The piece makes a reference to the sculpture The Thinker by Auguste Rodin. One basic prerequisite for attaining a multivocal voice is to sharpen
Another class, that's why.
One basic prerequisite for attaining a multivocal voice is to sharpen its control mechanisms. That is to say, its cybernetics. Perception at all levels, but first and foremost at the auditory level. For the ears, together with brains, lungs, pharynx, mouth cavity, and mouth tools, as I call the components of tongue, soft and hard palate, lower and upper lip, and eventually with the vocal apparatus itself, hence that flexible suspension system which comprises an interweaving of muscles, fascia, cartilages, which catch, dandle, and embed the vocal folds. They all form a mutually dependent and influencing complex feedback loop, within which all protagonists of the entirety of the vocal body are both attentive and involved in constant interplay with each other. The multivocal voice is, strictly speaking, an oxymoron. It is undeniable, however, that many voices in a single voice or in a single voice apparatus, respectively, are not only latent, but truly reside there. French contemporary philosopher Jean-Luc Nancy formulates that aspect as follows. La voix est toujours en elle-même articulée, différente d'elle-même, se différente d'elle-même, et c'est pourquoi il n'y a pas la voix, mais les voix plurielles des êtres singuliers. My own translation of the French original is this. The voice is always divided in itself, different to itself and differentiating itself. And therefore, there isn't the one voice, but a multiplicity of voices within singular voices. Hence, by using the term the voice in the singular, it should never be assumed that only one voice is indicated. It is key that the performance voice, if it opens up itself to the possibilities of multivocality, develops including powers as opposed to adhere conceptions of exclusivity. The approach to vocal art practices is usually characterized for being exclusive, compartmentalizing, isolating, sealing off the practitioner. If practicing opera singing, for instance, it's then implicit not to rehearse the rock or jazz voice. Genre distinctions are strictly preserved in the interests of satisfying the existing market. In this way of thinking, experiments, regardless of type, are excluded. In voice, rather, opposes such considerations just because it resists being restricted. The multivocal voice is not a one-register voice, but a multi-register voice. As a matter of principle, the enabling and the acquisition of a multivocal voice, and thus a multi-tempered voice, presupposes a multivocal thinking, thus an extended thinking. This thinking comprises a thinking in vocal sound banks and in vocal sound entities, a thinking in vowel planes and consonant fields, a thinking in segments, in registers, in vocal range sections, all of which in regards to the possible entirety of vocal sound areas exhibit gaps and show signs of fractures. For the voice in the totality of its potentially emerging segmentations produces those gaps naturally, yet cannot at the present time be continuous, but rather is non-linear. Looking at the evolution of the voice at the present time reveals the fact that it isn't always possible to continuously and gradually go from one technique to the other. Infinite readiness for the surprising, the unusual, the questioning also with a maximum of insecurity. which is a security in insecurity, with a maximum of despairing restlessness. Rest in the despairing restlessness. Searching is infinitely more important than finding. I say it again. Looking at the evolution of the voice at the present time reveals the fact that it isn't always possible to continuously and gradually go from one technique to the other. The question therefore is, how can I bridge the gaps between different techniques? How can I, starting from Asian harmonic singing or low tone singing as I'd like to call it, go to Western singing techniques and vice versa? Within the concept of the multivocal voice now, the performer tries to gradually cross and blend both techniques, even though different muscular proportions are applied, which is the reason why the task appears to be impossible. But that's exactly what the multivocal voice sets oneself to do, namely to acknowledge such a paradox and try to dissolve it, not to let the impossible remain impossible, but to venture the experiment, which is in this case the continuous, gradual and unbroken transition from one vocal art technique to the other, and to at least tackle and to eventually try to perform it with an unbiased and thus open attitude. The task and goal, therefore, is to achieve a permanent traversing and flowing into each other of the divergent vocal proportions. Maybe, or in other words, only if this succeeds and such thinking possibilities will have been transformed into unmistakably audible realities, then the foundations are laid to advance the evolution in a way which brings the human in proximity to his or her actual destiny. In German we call this Bestimmung. The voice in German is called Stimme. So in German it's called Bestimmung. Destiny is a Bestimmung. For if there is an objective of human evolution at all, then perhaps it's what creates an outright permeable being, a kind of fluidum of the self, and therefore approximates a homo mundi, which is Latin for the man of the world, so to say. That kind of seemingly utopian earthly human, no longer foreign to her himself or the other, regardless of her his respective whereabouts on the globe. Of course, we are far away from this idea. The vehicle, though, to set off in this direction can be, according to the framework of a plural society, the plural voice. a specifically experienced as well as consciously imbued concept of multivocality, which renders the individual a human fluidum that allows him herself to encounter the voice of the other in the sense of a looking through and a listening beyond. Thus, a permeation with an authentic empathetic gesture. Let's go back a step before it gets too agitated. I already mentioned the thinking in vocal territories, all of which from day to day are to be discovered anew. In a narrow sense, there are vowels and consonant areas. There are vowels and consonantal areas that count among those territories. In a more extended sense, but no less important, there are vocal sound areas beyond linguistic classifications, such as whistled sounds or combinations of those with voiced or hummed sounds respectively. All exclusively whistled sounds are produced bypassing the regular voice apparatus. In case of the lower lip whistling, I'm prone to call it, the air stream gets channeled by the tongue, assuming a tube-like form and then directed against the edge of the extremely stretched lower lip, which, comparing to the flute playing, serves as mouthpiece. This happens on the first level of sound production. On a second level, the fingers come into play and are applied as modulators, allowing instant pitch changes that, at great velocity, can create virtuosic effects such as trills. To give an example, I'd like to point to the video documentary of the outdoor composition for the whistling voice and potential birds called Searching the Magpie. Oh. Sorry. This is here it is. Okay. The multivocal voice seeks exchange during playing. The methodological foundation of the multivocal voice is in fact the exchanging drive to play with other multi-attunements. These encounters do not only occur among human beings, but also among animals, and, as the case of the outdoor composition Searching the Magpie aims to suggest, between humans and animals as well. The question arises how the playing with other multi-attunements can be understood. It's in this context that a special role is assigned to mimesis and the thinking about it. For mere imitation always carries the risk of caricature and not least the grotesque. This also concerns the voco-pedagogical means often applied here and abroad. As a matter of principle, it must be said that pedagogics in general tends to be a tool to implement an ideology and accordingly bears the impress of demagogy. In fact, I'm inclined to assert that without pedagogics, there wouldn't be any ideology, and without ideology, no demagogy. Without demagogy, no ideology, and without ideology, no pedagogics. Without pedagogics, there wouldn't be any ideology, and without ideology, no demagogy. Without demagogy, no ideology, and without ideology, no pedagogics. Voice pedagogics also have manipulative powers. This requires a word of warning. An artist's instinct must never be subordinated to external vocal education unless of one's own accord and above all as conscious decision. The multivocal voice is above all recording and playback device in one. It is a chest of memory full of remembrances that are saved within the body until death. Let's look at the example of the countertenor's voice. It is the manifestation of the retention of the boy's voice over the and beyond the puberty vocal change into the embedding of the muscular proportions of the adult man's voice. In this regard, the countertenor is mainly a memory performance. Of course, apart from the physiological nature of the puberty vocal change, there are psychological, gender-specific, social-cultural moments that act upon the muscular and mental memory. It seems important, though, to maintain the bridge to this particular memory and not to cut it off. In the case of retaining the boy's voice beyond adolescence, it's, above all, the sound. And in the more narrow and cultural sense, the music that can function as bridge. In conclusion, the work on the multivocal voice is characterized by remembrance work, on the one hand, which allows the performer to draw on a moment once retained, and by the capability to anticipate on the other, which ensures that the sound captured is elaborately released again at the right moment and with the help of a forward-looking as well as forward-listening attitude. Once embodied, it won't be forgotten that easily. Often, if untouched for a long time, the once embodied vocal material may slip off into unknown realms of our memory, but it can be retrieved if we always pay careful attention to the entirety of musico-sonic and the associated emotional, psychological, and social-cultural circumstances that we were in at the time when we experienced and went through those vocal moments that were to be remembered. All this determines the entirety of our state of being to a specific moment in time. Must be learned and rendered memorable and retrievable. Only if this technique of vocal mnemonics is made available are the premises for access to a treasure created which is never really lost, but instead always awaits its discovery. Once retrieved, we just have to unlock the vocal valuables that the multivocal voice holds. Perhaps it is a consequence of our task to insist ceaselessly on unclosing our voice. But it is exactly this literal audacity that allows the anticipation and thus the celebration of vocal treasures that eventually open doors that lead to a better understanding of ourselves from today to tomorrow. This being one of the necessary conditions, not only to contemplate our next evolutionary step, but also to take it. Thank you so much for your attention.
Zapraszam Państwa jutro, so you are cordially invited for the show tomorrow. There will be part of many events, but we have a quite intensive program, so that's some of them are corresponding to the lectures, and then most of them are just solo performances. So any questions? If you have any questions, please, that's the moment. Even that we cross a little bit the time limit, but those students were busy with some other classes, they left.
I realize that.
That's the evidence.
Yeah. So this made it all clear. No.
You read something from Jean-Luc Nancy. Can you tell us which book it was?
Yes, it was. It was on. I know the German title. Well,
yeah,
let's.
you can tell us. I mean, maybe, but for the others, it could be interesting in English.
Let's. That's why this is such a great tool, the online, and it should be here somewhere. It's die herausgeforderte Gemeinschaft in German, and the original is La Communauté Affrontée, Édition Gallier. And another great book on this issue is Die Mitteilung der Stimmen.
If you allow, Alex, I can link it also on the website of
Sure.
especially on the website of the studio, because we have just a separate list of lectures, so that would be even the proper place. On the website of the
Le
we have both.
partage des voix. This is also brings it. Yeah, that's where he touches upon that quote as well.
And what is also important, you know, on the Facebook we have a website of the festival, so there's also a place to the discussion going on all the time with some posts, with some remarks. So that's also the easy way to join certain people and us as a team with all volume towers.
Yeah.
So you are. We start at 6 o'clock. There's a tradition in the Audiat Festival. Always the Thursday in the middle is synchronized by two groups. One is group lab collectives. We have the meeting every week on Wednesday. We had the meeting yesterday. So the collective invites different and they are featured by also. And on the end, group lab is playing the performance. So today is the group lab orientation. Usually ended up by the electroacoustic marathon, but I moved the marathon for tomorrow. So then we will stay quite long with the electroacoustic acousmatic idea, but we will not reach the best result like 5 hours marathon 2 years ago. This year would be only 3.5, so more regular. I'm very sorry to be shorter. But today we have four programs. Robert Jędrzejewski plays Meditację on the first show, the solo cello with electronics. Then Laptop Ensemble, 3 composers from Wrocław, quite mature and known, Stanisław Kopowicz, Marcin Rupociński and Marcin Bortnowski. And then on the third we have a trio, which is Lorenzo Bruschi, Mirosław Tropymuk and Yuri Bulka. Yuri was sitting here, and there was the first question to you, that was Yuri. He ran 3 days Super Collider and Net Art workshop here from Monday to Wednesday.
Brilliant.
And then Group Lab close. I call the concert Group Lab close. We will be closing the event. Starting at 6 o'clock. You are all welcome. So thank you very much. I think that when we stay like this and then we move, then it will look like the end of the lecture. When I open the door, it will be more easier to indicate it. I jutro, proszę Państwa, bo to już mogę po polsku, so tomorrow, czyli jutro mamy o 12 godzinie wykład, to jest ten piątkowy wykład. Jutro będzie słynny kompozytor z Amsterdamu, Jan Bas Bolen, który przyjechał specjalnie, żeby wykonać swój utwór przez Nicolasa i Sherwooda. Znaczy Nicolas i Sherwood wykona jego utwór, ale on przyjechał specjalnie, żeby tego posłuchać, ale też żeby pomóc. Mamy koncert Electric Voice w sobotę o 21 w Kadrze. Jest 8 wykonań światowych utworów specjalnie opisanych dla słynnego kanadyjskiego wokalisty barytona. Voice Processing, głównie jest taka zasada 8-kanałowa przestrzeń. Dużo patchów maksowych specjalnie dla niego opisanych. Znaczy, bardzo miło zmagamy z Piotrem Madejem od 2 dni nad koncertem. Już go gotujemy. No i jest dużo jest właśnie wokalu w tym, aż się dziwię, tak się przyglądam temu festiwalowi i widzę, że co artysta to śpiewa. Dzisiaj nawet Lorenzo Bruschi zapowiedział, że będzie śpiewać. Ja mu powiedziałem, o nie, ale nie. A ja mówię, to cię umieszczę gdzieś w osobnym jakimś pomieszczeniu może. Zrobię sieciowy, tam coś śpiewa i nie wiadomo kto to robi. Taki bardzo alternatywny głos. Oh, you are from India, but you I was Polish now. Yeah, I remember.
And I wanted just to ask, where do you teach tomorrow?
That's a problem. I try to find it out, but the setup of English is so difficult that I announced that perhaps we have to skip. Last week I invited people to the Bunkier Sztuki because the installation was ready and I knew that it's easy. So then Edwin van der Heide, he was so happy. But Friday 2:30 is the most sparkling moment for
Yeah, but we
everyone.
can just meet in the audio art festival.
You can join. I was also thinking about because here we have Jan Bas Bolen, so the easiest way is just to join the lectures, which are like you are doing.
Yes.
But then most of the people from the students, they have some other lectures, and there's 3 in this time. That's my problem to make it to extract myself, and to come for the lecture, like we are usually doing. But I will think about, because I have all addresses, so that would be the best. If you come at 12 o'clock, or Jan Bas Bolen, I would be ready with this. This is like one thing which I have in mind, to be honest. But even if we don't sleep, we are just came 5 in the morning. We're speaking
Akademii Muzycznej.
yes, but this is the problem.
You can take it.
So let you know
See you
tomorrow.
tomorrow.
Yes, see you tomorrow.
Goodbye.
Jak fajnie.
I just
Nie ma to jak
extend
pakować
this,
płyty podczas
and
wykładu.
it's more flexible.
Ja lepiej się pakuję podczas koncertu.
Maybe some.
Wojny szelest.
That sound is
Dzięki. No, najbardziej to lubię robić moja wnuczka Kasia. wszystkie to odebrałem. I tą przyjemność nawet.
No, zabraliśmy
A to nawet fajne ręce jest.
przyjemność.
Te poliki są świetne.
No to jest pomysł Marcina Wackiego i on do tych woreczków dopasował format płyty. To jest jeżeli taka koncepcja. Jak to zrobić, jak to zrobić? O, takie woreczki są w takiej formacie. No i płyta nabrała takiego formatu. W związku z woreczkami. Był taki moment, że nagle przestali produkować te woreczki i się zastanawialiśmy, czy miałem format. No nie, no nigdy, przenigdy. Już jest jeden tylko wielkość. Płyty. No i mam teraz inną firmę gdzieś tam w Pile na północy kraju, od których kupiłem. Najpierw były poprzeczne, a teraz są podłużne te. To jest też osobny dział
A to jest...
na rynku.
Ale to nie jest na płyty właśnie?
Nie,
To na co to jest?
to jest do różnych produktów. Czyli wkładasz troszeczkę mniejszy produkt, no i zaklejasz go na końcu folią, którą zdejmujesz i wyrzucasz. To nie jest, dlatego jak ktoś wyjmie tę płytę, to potem jest kłopota. Przykleja mu się, jeden mnie wyrzuca i potem ma taką płytę, która mu wylatuje z tej okładki. Dlatego ja w tej chwili zastanawiam, ale to chętnie przyjmę pomoc. Wiecie, rozwiązanie najtańsze to jest ten krążek, na który się nakłada płytę. Ta tekturka jest wystarczająco twarda, żeby to utrzymać. Oczywiście trzeba byłoby w Photoshopie troszeczkę inaczej projektować to, co jest w środku, ale to tylko na tej prawej stronie. Trzeba by było otaczać tekstem. No tylko jeszcze trzeba jakoś tą płytę zamknąć, żeby ona się trzymała.
A może nie wystarczy po prostu zrobić taką... no właśnie coś takiego, taką półkopertę, taką, że się po prostu wkłada w róg tą płytę i ona już wtedy nie wypada, bo od dołu jest też trochę papieru.
Żeby zagiąć od dołu.
No tak, żeby jeszcze zagiąć od dołu i ewentualnie byłoby, nie wiem,
No jest troszeczkę tych, ja mam płyt tysiące, w związku z tym mam dużo tych alternatywnych różnych rozwiązań. Mi się oczywiście ten kształt podoba, bo on jest taki ani nie singiel, ani nie co, nie wiadomo co to jest, prawda?
Pocztówka.
No właśnie pocztówka dźwiękowa, wygląda najbardziej na pocztówkę dźwiękową. A może tak zrobić, żeby w końcu ta okładka stała się pocztówką dźwiękową i potem nagle te okładki się kręcą na gramofona i grają.
Albo otwiera się i zaczyna grać melodię.
Ja myślę, że Bajorga. To jest chyba dobry pomysł. Żeby zamienić to na ten chip taki grający i wszystko wydawać na ten chipach.
No, teraz na USB się wydaje dużo.
Że cały
Na USB. Po prostu USB stick.
to chodzi o koszt, wiesz.
No tak. A mój kolega na dyskietach teraz
Dlatego się
wydaje.
wycofaliśmy z tego na początku, bo była taka koncepcja pierwszego audiomatu, że tu jest na CD, tu jest karta micro SD, tutaj jest pendrive,
Dyskietki
wiesz,
jeszcze
taki był pomysł. I
Kasety.
każdą można inną cenę oznaczyć w tym takim urządzeniu, nie ma problemu, żeby na przykład prowadzić różnicować ceny. To jest zawirowanie. Ja już jestem do tego przyzwyczajony i to, jak zauważyliście, dość szybko się robi. Po drodze mam drukarnię, jadąc z domu do centrum, folię sobie kupuję dużo wcześniej. Koperty są wszędzie, w Carrefourze nawet są. Dawniej nawet płyty białe były, ale już ich nie ma. Tutaj
jest
na
na czym
Gertrudy w
słuchać?
Megabicie kupuję, chłopaków kupuję 100 sztuk. I to jest najtańsze. I w ten sposób się mieścimy w tej cenie. No wychodzi około 4 zł 60 groszy. Zarabiam 40 groszy na każdej płycie. 4 zł na 10 sztukach. A ponieważ rozdaję, no to potem tracę. Tracę to z trudem zarobione parę złotych od razu. Jedna płyta 5 zł już w plecy.
Trzeba być mniej dobrym.
Właśnie, nauczycie byśmy... Nie, mnie się to udaje czasami. No właśnie, miałem już dawno być i co teraz zrobić? Kurde. No, już się przestawiam na tego złego.
Albo trzeba iść do szefa po podwyżkę.
Teraz tak, ja myślę, że jeżeli ktoś ma czas i ochotę, to można z nim pójść na kawę, a ja pędzę do Hebra. Przecież tam
Jak
początek
to
był trudny. Wiecie dlaczego? No bo...
Odpierdolone wszystko, tak?
Nie, jak myślicie, dlaczego jest trudny początek?
Bo nic nie ma.
Ja sam bym nie wymyślił. Nie, bo stają i nie wiedzą jak się ustawić. To jest tak że tam zawsze musi być, no dobrze jest tam być właśnie na początku. Bo ja mniej więcej wiem, znam tych ludzi, wiem mniej więcej jak oni chcą grać. No bo na ogół to jest tak, najlepiej jak wszyscy grają na środku, nie? No ale jeżeli jest kilka zespołów, to zwłaszcza group lab. Group lab jest slave'em wszystkiego, także laptop może się podłączyć gdziekolwiek, ale ten Francesco musi wymyślić to kablowanie, żeby to było od razu sprawnie, bo myśmy się z tym zacinali właśnie, wiesz, zwłaszcza, że ta Bożenka, która wpada w ostatniej chwili ze znajomymi, jakimś jeszcze tutaj kogoś. Najlepszy był taki telefon, ja nagle widzę Katerinę na tym, tylko wyłącz webcast, dobra? Nie wyrywaj kabla, tylko zaczynaj paluszkiem.